friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. What's up, y'all? It's the MC Lars podcast. It is Monday, February 4th, 2019. This is episode 23. We have an amazing man on today, Samuel Salerno. Sam Salerno, or as I used to call him, Mr. Salerno, was my middle school English teacher. And he had a huge impact on me as a kid. He's one of those teachers who really... He showed me it was okay to be nerdy. That actually was cool to be nerdy. He showed me the majestic rock and roll powers of Rush when I was like mired in the, MTV sludge of Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails, which are great bands, but that was kind of my world as a middle schooler. So we'll tell the story in the podcast. But one day we're talking about Sepultura and their album Roots and Pantera. And he's like, you should check out Rush. You might like them. I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, yeah, I like their new album. I didn't really know much about Rush really at all, except the dude had a high voice. Then in homeroom, he comes in and puts a CD on my desk of Test for Echo. He goes, here you go. And just walks off like this magic boom. We did a book reports. One of them was what we had the option to read Anthem by Ayn Rand, which was an inspiration for some of Rush's songs. And Mr. Salerno was like, you might like this because Rush wrote songs about this book. And I was like, okay, lit hop, right? Like being able to take a book and turn it into a song, like that was the seeds of this. So I owe Mr. Salerno a lot. I mean, he helped me believe in myself. He showed me it was cool to love music, cool to love nerdy music. And we've stayed friends over the years. I've seen him over the years. We catch up every once in a while. When I was home for the holidays, he came up to hang out with me at my parents' house and we did this podcast. And he's got a few books out. His last few are called The New World and then one called The Soul Collects Its World. And he reads a poem from it. And he's got some stuff on Amazon. I recommend you check it out. But for any of you who are in California, especially the Central Coast, which is a little bit south of San Francisco, on Sunday, February 10th, he's doing a reading at the Old Capitol Books in Monterey. It's the Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium, which my dad is part of. So you'll get to meet two guests from the podcast, but I really recommend it. The Facebook page, let's see, you can learn more about it on Facebook. I'll put the link on Facebook in the description for this. But yeah, it starts at 2:00 and it's Old Capitol Books, 559 Tyler Street, Monterey, California. Please go see my dude, Mr. Salerno. So that's what's up. Thank you, Sam. This was a great episode. Oh, he also brought a book. We didn't get to talk about it, but he showed me. It's this book of Geddy Lee's bass collection, which is awesome. And Sam plays bass in a really cool band called the Transducers. And we're going to end this episode with a live recording of their original song, Lullaby, which was recorded at Poppy Hills Golf Course in Pebble Beach, which is near where I grew up. So really great to talk to Sam and really cool to like check in with a teacher and just tell him about the influence he had on me and talk about like his life and how he balances his creativity with being one of the most amazing dudes I've ever met. So shout out to you, Sam, Mr. Salerno. So I want to talk about what's going on in the world of MC Lars. First of all, I want to shout out the Patreon supporters, some of the new ones. Isaac, who goes by the name Nice Jewish Artist. We did a song together. Shout out to Nathan. Shout out to Travis John. Thank you all for your support. They joined this last week. Some of my old supporters, Michael, Leslie, Simon. Thank you all. And I do a freestyle on Friday. And this last Friday, I had a special thing where like, if you signed up during the freestyle or you messaged me as a Patreon supporter, you got a download of a rare album I made before Nothing to Fear, which was like the first CD I had for sale. So stuff like that. Friday, I do it at noon East Coast time. So that's 9 a.m. California time, 5 p.m. UK time. But thankfully, they're archived. I do it concurrently on Twitch, YouTube Live, and Facebook. So keep your eyes peeled for the Freestyle Fridays. Last week, actually, Mega Ran jumped on the Twitch chat and I called him. We talked about the album and then I called a fan and we talked about his life. So you never know what is going to happen. I am doing my regular releases. I just did a parody of Butterfly Doors by Lil Pump. Samurai Bros is my version. So that's either coming out this week or next. I'm doing the puppetry for that. I'm taking a class at the YouTube Space in New York. I'm visiting out there and doing a class on Premiere. So shout out to the YouTube Space. Like they have such great resources. What else? We've got the Infinite Jest songs coming out on Patreon. So be sure to check that out. And yeah, we've got a lot of great stuff coming up, but we don't need to get into it right now. Let's get into this interview with Mr. Salerno. Thank you, Sam, for being on the show, and stick around after for that fresh Transducers track. I'm MC Lars. Thank y'all for listening. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the MC Lars podcast. I'm here with a man who's had a huge impact on my life, and it's really cool that he had time to be on the podcast today. Please give it up for Mr. Sam Salerno. Woo!
Hey, Andrew.
Good morning, Sam. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
This is awesome that you came out to my parents' house where I had my gear set up to be on the podcast, because when I started this, I was like, who's someone interesting who I can get? And I was really happy you had time to do this. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me. It's great to see the folks again and you, and it's awesome to be here.
I think we connected in 2010. Maybe we had coffee is the last time I saw you. Do you remember that, like in Monterey?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen you also at the New Year's shows, and I think I've run into you a couple other times as well.
It doesn't feel like 20. I've been out of high school 20 years, honestly. Almost.
It doesn't at all. No, you look the same, and hopefully I look the same,
You
but
do,
probably
man.
not.
You look the exact same. And you were saying you've been teaching. This is your 27th year teaching.
Yeah, it's been a long road, and I didn't know where it was going to go when I started. It just started at the middle school at Stevenson, and it just went from there. And now I'm up at the high school, so it's been great.
So I think I started middle school in like 94. When did you start at Stevenson teaching?
Yeah, right about then, 93, 90. Well, I subbed for a woman who was on maternity leave, and then the following year, they offered me a job teaching fourth grade, which was the toughest year teaching in my life. You know, because the kids were great, but they're at that age, they're energy vampires, and I'd go home every night and I'd be absolutely exhausted. But it was a good training ground, because it was a self-directed classroom, and I had to teach all the subjects. So math and science suffered a little bit, probably, but the literature and history was pretty good.
What makes fourth grade particularly like energy vampire-ish? Because they're so hyper? Or?
Yeah, I think, well, you're with them for the entire day, and they're just so full of energy, and it's beautiful energy. It's great energy. You know, it's the neatest thing to be around them, but you just, at the end of a day, you go home and you're like, oh my God, I have no energy left. It's been sucked out of me. So, but it was a great experience.
One of the things I always admired about you, and still do, was how you were able to keep your musician skills playing bass, and you were releasing all these poetry books and doing readings and signings. And that was so cool to me, to see someone who kind of had this DIY punk rock kind of approach, being able to create content and also, you know, have your quote unquote day job of teaching, but also balance it with your art. And that's kind of like a theme of this podcast, is creative people who have found ways to just make the most of their time and not let the media industry dictate what kind of things they should create. And
yeah,
I want to talk about that.
Well, I wonder if teaching has something to do with it. I mean, there are blocks of time that we get off, like, you know, I'm on Christmas break right now, and that's going to be a great time for me to work on music and work on some writing ideas. And we have more of that in the summer as well. So I think that's been a big part of being able to have a full-time job and also create some art.
That's cool. Were you always writing poetry?
Yeah, I started in high school, and I had a wonderful teacher. His name was Chad Lincoln. And I often think of him as I teach my poetry classes now. I sort of draw from his tutelage. And then I started writing in earnest in college at Pepperdine, where I did my undergraduate work, and it just kept going from there. And I've never really stopped. I've had breaks where, like in the last couple of years, I haven't been doing too much writing with the passing of my mom, and you know, getting that all squared away and moving through that time and that passage. So, but yeah, I keep coming back to it, and it's a pendulum. I go back and forth between music and writing. So I'm in the music phase right now.
What's your band? Do you have a band you play with, or a few bands?
Yeah, I'm working with a group called the Transducers right now, and we played a few gigs this last year, and we sort of all met doing musical theater, working at this theater in Monterey, and we played together for about a year on these shows like Rocky Horror and Crybaby and these other musicals. And then one day we kind of looked at each other and said, well, hey, why don't we take this on out on the road, or just be a band and play out. So we've been working on that, and we're still sort of in an incubation like stage. We're not fully out yet, but hopefully in the next year we'll get some more gigs out there and play.
That's kind of the best, right? Like when it's people who you respect, who all want to play, and you're doing it not because you're trying to get signed or whatever. You're doing it because maybe you'll make some money, but really for the passion and the joy of playing, right? That's like the best, I bet.
Yeah, and they're just really nice people that I'm working with, and I think it helped the fact that we played together for a year before we even started doing this band project. So we know each other very well, and there's a cohesiveness there that we've already established.
You all have good chops, I guess.
Well, we try.
Yeah.
Yeah, we try.
What's it like playing like for musical theater? Because I imagine you rehearse and you get really close, and at the end of a musical, maybe you don't see the same actors again, or
right. It's very much like a mandala. You create this beautiful moment in time, and then you have to say goodbye to it. So it's an odd feeling at the end of a run. You're like, oh, okay, now what? Oh, I'll see you. Well, I don't know when I'll see you next. So yeah, it's a strange feeling. It's an intense amount of work, and then you get through it, and then it just you wish it away, or you say goodbye to it. So it's a tough process.
Sometimes you start a band with the people you play with.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's the next step, right? Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up here on the Monterey Peninsula, specifically in Carmel Valley.
Wow.
area. Yeah. Lived at the mouth of the valley, and then ultimately moved into town when I was a teenager. So, it was a wonderful growing up here.
What was it like? Like, so in the 80s and 90s, like what was this place like?
Well, it was a lot quieter, that's for sure. It always had some wealth to it, but maybe not as much as it does now. It was a lot quieter. It was probably a closer knit community, and there were a lot of people who were just sort of middle class families who just happened to have been here a long time. So, and I'd say probably around the mid '80s, it really began to shift a little bit. So now you have sort of more of a cosmopolitan jet set quality to the area that wasn't there before.
Was it like a lot of pickup trucks and more like people who were ranchers and
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, especially here in the valley. It just had a more rural feel to it.
what's that area that I've never been to, but it's like the famous part where the Carmel River bends. It's like the bucket or something like that.
Yeah,
Is that what it's called?
yeah. That's I mean, I don't even know if what's there now. I don't know if it's been blocked or diverted, but yeah, a lot of kids used to go out there way back when.
And like just jump off rocks into the water or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, you'd probably go and drink beer or whatever, and maybe smoke something you're not supposed to, that sort of thing.
It was like the hangout spot in the 80s and 90s.
And even before, I'd say,
Yeah.
I don't know if kids still go there today, but
You have to hike into it. I've never been, but I've heard this fabled stories, growing up here about that place. Did you have to hike in, or was
no,
it like
no.
easy?
It was just it was accessible. You just had to climb down into this kind of ravine or area, so
Yeah.
it wasn't hard to get to.
What was like the music culture in the Monterey Peninsula like back then? Was there one?
Well, growing up as a kid, I mean, it's a interesting. My dad was a radio man, and he owned KRML radio station. So there was there was a music scene. I sort of ebbs and flows. I mean, there are years where there's a lot of great music out there, and then years where there's just not too much. And I think part of it has to do with what venues want to give, or what's available in terms of places to play. So I would say that you had the jazz festival was always a big deal, and and there were some rock stars and people that would come here, and for single nights, sort of like what the Sunset Center does now. So it was there. I mean, I wouldn't say it was super vibrant, but it was there.
And Dylan lived out here, didn't he?
Yeah,
Briefly.
he did for a time. I think that's when he was with Joan Baez. I don't know how long they were here. It might have been only 6 months or a year, but apparently he was here at one point.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate all this as I've gotten older, and like the story of Hendrix burning his guitar at the Monterey Pop Festival.
Yeah.
Like all these being kind of close to San Francisco, people say like, and I remember when I went to New Zealand and there's this place called Stewart Island, which was at the bottom.
Mhm.
And I met someone there who worked, she was like a production manager for Cirque du Soleil.
Oh.
And she said, islands kind of have this deep wisdom because people come and they make a big impact on a small place. Like people come, like poets would come there, or scientists, and people would remember them. And that stuck with me because it seems like that's kind of like the Monterey Peninsula. The people who have been here, like Kerouac and Steinbeck and all these interesting people, got inspired by the beauty of this place.
Sure.
And left a mark. And then the legacy lives on, and people like you who are like Renaissance men who teach and are artists too. And I really, having traveled a lot, I realized that there's no place in the world like Monterey, Carmel Valley. Would you agree?
Yeah, I certainly. I mean, you could go back to the early 1900s where you had, Robinson Jeffers was here. Jack London spent a little bit of time here. It was sort of this bohemian artist colony before it became, what it is today. And so that spirit has been here for a long, long time. I think the Chinese inhabitants here who were here a century ago noted that this place has some kind of special energy to it. And I mean, not to get mystical, but I think there's some truth to that. It just is a really special, intense, insular place that brings out the best in people and the artistry in people. And it's no wonder that you have guys who have come here like Henry Miller. He lived out in Big Sur, and all these other writers and musicians as well.
And like, there's that Chili Peppers song, Danny California, where he talks about driving down that Highway 1,
And Flea has a house out in Big Sur. So
I didn't know that.
He does. Yeah. You can see him
crazy.
sometimes at the Monterey airport. It's strange. Like, hey, there's Flea.
Yeah. Or like, gosh, seeing famous people, like I remember we'd always, not always, but often see just Clint Eastwood getting his car washed or walking around Carmel. Like he was one of the luminaries that, everyone has a Clint Eastwood story,
Right. Well, and he came here in the 50s and he's as local as it gets. So, I mean, he really has blended into the scenery and landscape around here.
And people leave him alone, which I guess he appreciates.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And he's a nice guy. And you're right. People give him his space because they just see him as just another person who lives here.
I'm sure it's the tourists who would bother him.
Yeah. He's a lot of stories of people wanting his autograph and talking to him and stuff. And he's been mostly nice to them.
So so you moved back here after, I'm sure. So you went to Pepperdine.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
It's 5.5 hours down the road, the coast. It had some of the qualities of here because it's right on the coast. It's a conservative school.
It's near Malibu.
It is, yeah.
On the hill there.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, right?
It's gorgeous. Yeah. Very nice. And it was a time of flowering for me. I got into all these books and all these ideas. It was fantastic. I do wish, in hindsight, though, as the kids do at Stevenson now, they go on these tours and trips. It would have been nice to maybe explore other schools besides those in California. But back in my day, we just didn't do that. We just kind of stayed in California, and very few people went out of state for college.
And do you think your life would have been different if you had like gone to school like on the East Coast or something? Or I mean, obviously it would have, but it seems like you were drawn back here for a reason, right?
Right. No, yeah, and I don't I think in some ways you're meant to live the life that you were going to live, and so I don't look back and regret in that way. I just it would have been interesting to have more options, to see what else was out there. And we tended to just stay here in the state. So
Not bad though. Not a bad
no,
place.
no, not at all. No.
I remember I was driving past that school going over the mountain when I was living in LA. I was like, oh, this campus is beautiful. Oh, and like being like impressed by, yeah, just how imagine it's kind of like a idyllic place, but maybe a place where you're kind of like inured to the beauty or used to it, right? Like
Right.
living here, you're like, oh, there's the ocean. That's just always there, and I don't know.
Well, I never got tired of that. You're right. It's very beautiful, and uh, every day you're in awe. You're looking at this marvelous eye of the world, as Jeffers puts it. And it was fantastic. It was a fun and lovely time and place to be.
When did you start playing bass, and why bass as
Uh,
opposed to other instruments?
Yeah, well, I think the old cliche is that hey, we don't have someone to play bass. You're the guy now. I actually started on drums, and
Oh wow.
yeah, and I probably it would have been nice to keep doing that. But eventually, I just had a really dear friend who was a guitar player, and we wanted to get something going, and he had a drummer lined up, and so I just started playing the bass, and really took off with that in college. Started in high school, and then really got serious about it in college.
And what were some of your bass influences?
Well, definitely progressive rock players. Chris Squire of Yes was a big influence. Geddy Lee, of course, was huge, and Sting of the Police was also an influence. Just in the way that he conducted his band, and with the singing aspect of it too. But those guys were the ones that I sort of looked to.
So that's kind of cool that Stuart Copeland, when he and Trey and Les Claypool started Oysterhead, he was used to playing with the bassist frontmen, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that Sting was a bass player.
He was,
Yeah.
and he's an incredible musician. I mean, some of his acoustic guitar work is pretty good, and you'd never think of it, and you'd think, well, he doesn't really stand out that much on the bass, but he's a good, solid bass player. But he's an all around incredible musician. So I took that to heart. I really appreciated the fact that he could produce, and he was a great singer, and that voice is so distinctive that, yeah, it just it's incredible.
And a great poet. He's written some great songs.
Yeah, for sure.
Talking about progressive rock, a lot of people might not realize that the band Dream Theater is named after a actual theater that was in Monterey.
Yeah, Mike Portnoy's dad actually worked for my dad at KRML, and Mike used to come out and spend the summers here. And he was from New York, and his dad was living out here, and so Mike would come out, and we spent a lot of time together. And
Wow.
yeah, he's a really great dude. But we sort of lost contact right around the time he was becoming a teenager, and that's the time where he was really starting to play drums a lot. And I remember even then, I was like, wow, yeah, Mike, you can really play these things. But he was very modest about it. He didn't talk a lot about it, but he was good then, and now he's monstrous, right?
So they would go to that theater, or he thought, oh, that's a cool name for a band.
Yeah, he was looking for a name for the band, and I think it was his dad who suggested the Dream Theater. Why don't you name yourselves that? And they said, okay, yeah, that sounds good.
And now it's been gone for a while, right? Did they tear it down, or is it still there?
It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
The Dream Theater, I can't remember exactly when it closed. It might have been 2000 or so, right around that time. The drummer in our band worked there for many years, and he thinks about it fondly. But we love that place. That was just such a cool place to go watch a show.
And I remember the seats were so big and like it's a
Mhm.
really unique place. I remember we went there with Mr. Jacobs, who was my advisor, 6th grade. Was that
Yeah.
Michael Jacobs?
Yeah.
And we went on a advisee trip to the to the Dream Theater, and that was the only time I went there. And then getting into the band and like being completely amazed that it was they named themselves after that place. It's
Right.
pretty tight.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great piece of Monterey lore. And it's too bad that the place isn't still there because it really was a fantastic theater and part of that area of Monterey.
It's interesting coming back here, seeing like Pacific Grove and everything. It's changing a lot. Like there's always new buildings, and it's like, but it all in a lot of ways it doesn't change. You know what I mean? It seems like it's got a weird balance like that.
It does. I think maybe it's just partly because the area is not that big. Water is always an issue. That it's probably not going to get built out too much more. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but you're right. It seems like things do stay very much the same. You could walk down Carmel any day, and it's almost like being there 30 years before.
Yeah, and you've seen the changes or seen the things that haven't changed, I guess, in your time here.
Yeah, things have stayed very much the same. It's just a lot more crowded,
Yeah,
a lot more people.
and traffic is increased. Would you say?
It has, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Um, as a poet, who are some of your influences like in poetry?
I'd say my number one influence is William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet. I've spent a lot of time in Ireland in the last few years, studied him, and for me, he is the benchmark. He is the one that, if you're really serious about writing poetry, you want to aspire to write as well as he does, but knowing that you're not going to do that, but you have to aim high. So he has been a big influence on me. Jeffers, of course, being the local poet, he was an influence. And then just all the greats, Wallace Stevens, and E. E. Cummings. He's been a big influence. Emily Dickinson. So sort of draw from a lot of different writers, but Yeats is the guy for me.
What particularly do you like about Yeats? Is like his meter or his?
To me, Yeats combines the artistry of writing poetry with with a philosophy and a progression. As his life progressed, as his thinking progressed, his poetry also mirrored that. And so he starts out as this romantic poet of the 19th century, and by the time he passes in the late 1930s, he's his voice is very modern. So there's this beautiful evolution. He didn't fade. He got stronger and stronger as his life and his poetry went on into this just culminating explosion of beautiful writing. So I liked that he was very spiritual, incredibly spiritual, but whatever he believed, it never got in the way of his writing. So just technically masterful, had a way of spinning words that was just remarkable. And his life was on display in his poetry, and it was just this evolution of a man, of a mind, and a way of seeing the world. So it just he wasn't distracted, I'd say, and that's something to be admired.
Do you teach him in your classes?
In my poetry elective, yeah, he comes up again and again.
I remember, I just remember that class very well, because reaching students through poetry, I wonder if they're more distracted now or they're more excited about connecting with timeless words. What is it? How has it changed? This is one of my questions for you. Like, how has it changed in the 27 years with kids now, with something like poetry, or has it?
I'm not sure it has changed too much. Certainly, I mean, the smartphones can be a distraction within the classroom, but speaking about the way kids receive poetry, the way it speaks to them, the way it inspires them and fires them up. I think it's still the same. I love when I see students really connecting and really getting into it. Their art transforms, when they start the class, and by the end of the term, they're writing some incredible stuff. So the as the Who says, the kids are all right.
That's cool,
Yeah.
actually. I wonder at Stevenson, did they allow kids to have their phones in the class or not? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's a balance, because actually they're able to do more and more on the phone that might be class related, in terms of looking at their calendars, in terms of utilizing an app that might be relevant to a certain lesson. We use a grammar platform online, for example, that they can use from their phones. But it's sparing. I mean, you have to really be on it and tell them, okay, put that away now, and let's get on to something else.
So if someone's sneakily texting under the desk, you're like, all right, Bob, no, we're not going to play that right now.
Yeah. It's and you have to be aware of that, because it happens.
I remember it was in 2000, the school really adopted the laptop technology, and we were doing spreadsheets, and the school being connected through Ethernet connections, and like that being really helpful, and I remember making music during my free period it was like we had PCs and on this old program called Fruity Loops, which now FL Studio, all the rappers use that,
Huh.
and it was like being able to have music classes and technology like education was really useful. Do you think Stevenson's been ahead of the curve with technology, or like?
I would say in some ways I think they've been ahead, and I would say now they're in line with other schools. I mean, you look at a school like Monte Vista Christian up in Watsonville, they're an iPad school, so every student has one. So I think schools are making inroads in many different ways. So I honestly don't know if we're ahead of the curve, but I would say early on, I would say we were.
Are you how many of the old school teachers are still there? Like, let's see, if I'm trying to think, is Mr. Smith still there?
No, he retired a couple years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, we've had a few retirements in the last couple of years, so all the luminaries and the great lights have moved on.
Mr. Miller, is he still there?
No, he's retired too.
Wow, and rest in peace to Dr. Roth. That was a shock.
Yeah, we're all very sad about that.
I saw your post about that, and that's how I found out. And man, I fortunately had seen him, over the years since I graduated, and kept in touch with him. But yeah, I remember he really prepared us for college, with Hamlet and all that.
Yeah, he was a fantastic teacher. I mean, I don't think anyone ever corrected papers better than he did. I mean, we just shake our heads and go, how do you have time to do all that? I mean, his responses were longer than the essays that were submitted. So,
Yeah.
so we had our work cut out for us. He kept us to a high standard.
He raised the bar on the marginalia, right?
Exactly.
Well, so instead of me asking all the teachers, I remember, who's still there that you think was there when you started? Is anyone?
John Sanuda although he's retiring soon, but he's there. Dale Hinckley, Cole Thompson. And boy, beyond that, it's not too many others.
Mr. Hamish Tyler's teaching at that school in Salinas.
Yeah.
And I went and did a few workshops for his students, and that was cool to see him. Him being in a new context, you know what I mean?
Right.
And still being the same Mr. Tyler.
Right. Yeah. I saw him at a football game last year, and it was nice to see him. He's doing his programmer's office. They also do color commentary for high school football games as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And another special thing, which I also realized was very rare, was having a 1,000-watt radio station that they let kids program music on. Like KSPB was huge for me. That was probably my favorite memories in high school, like extracurricularly, was that, learning how to do that, and learning that, like, if you play the wrong song, you're going to be in very big trouble because the FCC, not only is your teacher going to be listening, the FCC is going to come after
Big
you.
Brother's listening and watching, right?
Yeah, that was, man, how is it, the radio station there? Is it still kind of active with the students?
It is. They're still doing their shows. I haven't listened too much lately, but one of our teachers has a fun Thursday show.
Oh,
It's a Thursday Detention with David Schmickens, who's now our department head of English, and he's awesome and funny. And that's a good show. And they always have a theme each week. And so the radio station's going strong. It's incredible. I mean, I think if I were a prospective parent with a student, I think that would be a big draw for me, just seeing that and how high tech it is, and it reaches a lot of people, and the community loves it because it has BBC as well on it.
and I remember they sent us to New York for the CMJ radio conferences a few years. Like that was my first exposure to New York, being 16 and like in New York, like with my peers. That's special. That's a lot of trust you put in a kid, you know,
Right.
not to get in trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
And I remember Chris Gates and I, who I interviewed also, we had our Friday morning show, and that time from 7:30 to 8, knowing that like a good majority of the school was listening, this direct, having like this kind of monoculture moment where that's special, man. Being able to have this voice to talk to the whole community and play, you know, the kind of music we played. And yeah, I look at it fondly because to me, it's like a very 20th century memories of like everyone tuned in to the station.
Right.
But I guess people, I imagine people still listen, but I also wonder if kids have radios in their dorms. I don't know. Maybe they listen online.
No, they're streaming it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one difference, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, I wanted to share, this is a story that is very special. And this is a story of A+ teaching. I remember you knew I was really into Marilyn Manson and a lot of like industrial music. And you said to me, hey, have you heard of Rush? And I didn't really know them that well. I knew the name. So one day you come in during homeroom and you plop down their new album, Test for Echo, on my desk. You bought it, you know, and you picked it up for me and you're like, here you go. Check this out. You might like it. And that definitely, that album and that whole era changed my life. And I would say that Rush was a huge influence on me becoming a nerdcore rapper. And one of my first songs, I have a line I say, I still like Rush and Dr. Dre. I still keep bumping NWA, like always referencing them. So I wanted to thank you for that and see if you remember buying that CD for me.
Yeah, that I do remember. You know, I think, you know, if teaching has subversive moments, maybe that was one of them where I will change this young mind here now. But no, I really, you know, you obviously loved music, and I thought, hey, you know, check it out. What do you know, see what you think? And happily, it turned out to be ended up being an incredible experience with the concert. I don't know if you're going to mention that too.
Yeah, they played San Jose on their tour, and me and my dad went, and you'd made this mixtape of like catching us up on everything pre Test for Echo, and you made like liner notes about which album, and that was really cool because it was before Spotify, right? And before Napster, it was this ability to this great overview of someone who really knew the band intimately, both as a musician and as a writer, getting to write up with you and listen to their old songs, and then loving that tape, like wearing that tape out because it was so cool how, yeah, that band is so diverse, and so their musical chops and lyrical chops were so sensitive and so smart. And I remember saying, it's so different from the other music I listen to. You can actually hear the words, what they mean.
Right.
I remember you thought that was funny.
Yeah. Well, it's nice when you can actually understand and hear what they're saying. But yeah, so we went up there to that concert. It was the Test for Echo tour, which was 1996. And we were lucky because after that, the drummer, Neil Peart, had a series of tragic events happen to him, and it was doubtful whether they were even going to play again. And it was 6 years before they came back and actually played. And really cool story is I was in Connecticut doing some graduate work, and their first show back after their 6-year hiatus was in Hartford, Connecticut in 2002. And that was the Vapor Trails tour.
Yeah.
So that was amazing.
And you went?
And I went,
Heck
and
yeah.
it was incredible. Yeah.
Vapor Trails was their big comeback record, I guess.
It was.
Was it? I mean, after Test for Echo, the next one they did was Vapor Trails.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't do anything for 6 years. Geddy Lee released, the bass player released his own solo album, and but Pert sort of came out of his, that tailspin of the life events that happened to him, and they made a great album. They remastered it several years later I'm not sure what reasons they wanted, but they didn't like the recording ultimately, so they went back and re-engineered it.
And then it was Snakes and Arrows. Was that the next one?
Yeah, Snakes and Arrows, which was okay. It was good. It was different. But I think Vapor Trails for me was kind of like their last really, really great album.
What were you studying in Connecticut for grad school?
I was doing a master's in humanities.
Cool.
Yeah, and I did it over 4 summers.
Wow, man! I never knew that.
Yeah.
What was that? UConn or?
It was Wesleyan.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
That's
in Middletown.
awesome.
Yeah.
So you had to balance. Wow. So you knew your summers would be booked for 4 summers.
Yeah. But it was great because
Yeah.
I drive across the country and back, and what a great way to see the country is, just drive.
Oh, you drove there?
Yeah, a couple times I drove, and one time I went 80 and then 70 back. Another time I went 40 and then 80 back. So it's great to really see the rest of the country.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And we were talking earlier, Connecticut's where my wife is from. So I've gotten to know Hartford pretty well. I'm going there for Christmas. So I'll say hi for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
When people ask me my favorite Rush album, I always say Test for Echo because I remember one of the stories was there. I had an online girlfriend who lived in San Diego when I was like 14. This girl I talk on AIM, and they have a song, Virtuality. It was a song about people meeting online.
Right.
And
right.
that was so early to do a song about online relationships. 96? Come
Yeah.
on, Rush. That's awesome, right?
Yeah, they were always ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, so not a surprise there that they had that song. And it is a great album. I mean, the whole 90s for them was a, sort of a renaissance. They had these quirky albums in the 80s, kind of up and down, but they really reestablished their sound in the 90s with Counterparts and then Test for Echo.
Kind of subtraction of the synths, right? He kind of
they went back to kind of that heavy guitar sound and kind of withdrew from the keyboards a little bit.
What do you think of Roll the Bones?
It's an album that's generally panned, but I like it a lot. I mean, I like everything they do, so
Yeah.
I'm an easy sell. But yeah, I think it's certainly not one of their best, but I liked it.
They Roll the Bones has this rapping skeleton verse, right?
Right.
Remember
right.
they had a CGI, and I thought that was so cool. And another thing I remember about the concert was we had our earplugs. You were going hard without earplugs, just rocking out. I was like, man, Sam loves this band so much. He's
Yeah.
not going to wear earplugs. And as I've gotten older, when I love a band, I'm not trying to wear earplugs,
That's why I can't hear now, right? Yeah. Well, you lose some stuff with even in rehearsing, it's sometimes it's a good thing to have those, but I would always just have one ear with an earplug and one ear without.
There you go. When I play with a drummer, I try to wear them. I used to, and like on festival tours, like I play with in-ear monitors,
Mhm.
but if it's a smaller club, like I don't know. Yeah. When I'm no drummer, I've more and more taken them out, and maybe that's because my hearing is gone, and I don't know, but
It's tough because they often want you near them, and that's a good thing, but it's also you're getting these specific sounds and tones that are really hitting your ears in a harsh way sometimes.
and the snare is the crashes really can like cause the damage.
Yeah, it's the crashes for sure.
And then I remember when in middle school also, you showed your students that you cared, and I remember for one of the book reports, we got to choose one, and you recommended an Anthem by Ayn Rand because 2112 was kind of inspired by that book. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Did I say her name right? Ayn?
Ayn Rand. Yeah.
And reading that and the idea of like a rock opera based on a book was really inspired me. The literary rap stuff I do, that you can, this transmedia idea that you can take a piece of literature and turn it into a musical. And, I guess
Right.
Neil Peart took some liberties with the story, but it's basically the same story.
It's
For
very,
the-
very similar. Yeah. The only difference in 2112 is the guy finds a guitar, and that's instead of like a light bulb, he finds this guitar to play on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever read Ready Player One? Do you know that book?
I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
They have a whole chapter. It's so this guy has to it's in the future dystopia,
Mhm.
and he has to kind of save the world by finding this guy's treasure, and he goes on this treasure hunt. But anyway, there's a whole section based on 2112
Oh, wow.
where it's so great because it's so true to the album, and he has to get the guitar and play the note for note. And if I didn't know that album, I wouldn't have really loved that chapter so much. But in the movie they recently did, they omitted all that, which
Huh.
surprised me. But I thought, was Rush super mainstream? Do you think, like back in the 80s and stuff?
They became mainstream with an album called Moving Pictures, which has Limelight on it and Tom Sawyer and Red Barchetta. And right around that point, they were, and then the next album after that, they had a hit off of that called New World Man, which was an afterthought. They weren't even going to put that on the album, and it turned into a big hit. But so yeah, there was a period probably between like 1979 and 84 where they were pretty big.
What was your exposure to them personally?
Well, I just started listening to them. I mean, any kind of classic rock of that time, whether it was Journey or Rush or a band called Triumph, before heavy metal got really big, it was sort of those bands. And Kansas was another, these sort of progressive rock bands. And that's just sort of how I got into it. But then also the fact that Neil Peart, the lyricist, is so well read, he could teach English. I mean, he comes up with these references and you're like, how does he know this? He must have gotten a degree in English. I don't know if he has or not, but he's incredibly well read. And so there's so many literary references and allusions that it sort of satisfies the soul to be listening to great music and being reminded of these literary characters and such.
Like Spear of the Radio, that's a great metaphor. And also Limelight. I remember you explaining like that's what fame feels like.
Right. The gilded cage of fame,
And how Neil Peart, I remember seeing the Rush documentary. He spent a lot of time writing and not wanting to do the meet and greets with the fans just because he didn't want that. Kind of more of a shy guy, I guess.
Very much. It's always Getty and Alex were the ones who were always taking all the interviews and meeting the people. And he was sort of the shy professor in the background who didn't want to have anything to do with all that stuff. And which is fine.
It worked. It worked fine. I mean,
Right.
Look at their discography.
Right. They were great.
Okay. So Sam, you've written, how many poetry books have you released?
I think I'm at 6 now.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And then I remember you did a translation of the Battle of Muldoon?
The Battle of Malden. Yeah.
Malden.
Yeah. Which was an Anglo-Saxon poem from the battle was in 991. And the poem was written sometime after it, a few years after. And it's sort of, people know about Beowulf and that, but this is a lesser known poem. But I was interested in translating. And so I took a year and a half to work on that project. And it was right after linguistics was my graduate degree. And so I was really interested in translating in language at that time. So I took a year and a half and came out with a translation of it.
It's pretty cool. And has anyone else translated it since?
It's been translated time and time again. I don't know who's done it recently. But I went back and revisited it about, I want to say about 8 or 9 years ago and kind of redid it and made sure, kind of spruced some things up here and there.
Wow.
But yeah, so I'm proud of that because I took a long time with it.
What were some of the challenges of translating something so old, and what was like particularly fun about that?
Well, it's like working on a puzzle and trying to put the right words together. But there are cultural connotations to the words in Anglo-Saxon that are lost. There's the musicality of the lines of the words that you have to try and, or you attempt to restore in a modern translation. There are words like, for example, in Anglo-Saxon, there's several words for sword. And so, and what they would do is they would have alliteration in these two lines. There would be a line break between, in the middle of the line, there would be a line break, and there would be alliteration in the first part that would alliterate to the second part of the line. So, the challenge is like that. So not only do I have to find a word that matches this, I have to try and see if I can come up with the sound quality as well. So if there was a G alliteration in that line, I sometimes have to change it to another consonant because that's all I could do. So that was a challenge, but that was the fun of it.
And make it go through the entire line. So you have to then be creative. I guess there's a creative element, right?
Right.
And that's cool, man. That's really cool.
So, yeah, and so the tone, you would hear the rising tone of what was being said in a particular line, or it would become more muted, and then that's where the creativity comes in, because you have to try and transpose that into modern English.
Do you still teach it as part of your curriculum?
I don't now. It's the sophomore year is where they do British literature, and they do some of the old poems. And I teach freshmen and seniors, so I don't get a chance to.
So what are some of the freshman staple books that you'd still teach?
We do Of Mice and Men. We do The Odyssey and The Tempest. Those are sort of our core books. And then I also do The Alchemist, Flowers for Algernon, and The Old Man and the Sea. So those are the basically what I do in the freshman year.
So they give you, like, you get to choose about half of them?
Yeah, we have to do the core books so that everyone's doing the same thing, and then we are allowed to pick our own after that.
Speaking of The Alchemist, so I had a friend who would appreciate that book too, and the part where there's like the tea shop, and he helps that man get his business back?
Right.
So every year when I used to play this festival called South by Southwest in Austin, I always saw that, and I describe it as my tea shop, because I had to make sure my set was good. I had new material. I was collaborating with other artists there, and that if I were sloppy that year, it wasn't going to be a good musical year. And that I always thought of that in terms of that with that book, and
so that was like your workshop.
Yeah, my workshop,
yeah,
where you could prove that. I love how he comes in there and just cleans up and shows, no, if you care and you're invested, and you can change the world through that alchemy, and that's
right.
Yeah, I bet that book has a special meaning to you as a creative man too.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's I love the story, the parable about the boy who goes to see a king, and the king tells him, go and see my palace and all the wonders in it. And by the way, carry this cup of oil with you as you go. And he goes around, and he comes back to the king, and the king says, well, where's my oil? And he said, well, you told me to look at all the beauty of the palace. I wasn't paying attention to the oil. And he says, come on, go do this again. And so, and so he goes out again, he comes back, and the oil's there. And the king said, well, what did you see? And he said, well, I didn't see anything, because I was paying attention to the oil. And the king's message to him was, you see the beauty and the wonders, but pay attention to the details as well. So that's the workshop, right? You're doing what you love, and you're doing what's beautiful, but you have to also pay attention to and mind the details of what you're doing and the craft of it.
That's like a beautiful example for anyone, and I'm sure a lot of listeners to the podcast are creative people who also are balancing it with you can't just sit around and paint all day. I mean, some people can, but that is very rare, and that sometimes makes your art kind of uninformed unless you're able to pay attention to the details and live in the real world and use that as a conduit to express. I guess that seems like a metaphor that might be appropriate there.
Right.
Too.
And the idea too, for example, in music, when you're doing finger exercises, they seem to be very boring and rote, but if you pay attention to them, they come back in myriad ways when you're playing, and by being attentive to those seemingly boring things, they help create the art later. So
That is cool. Or they give the art more strength and yeah,
Right.
the craft. That's
Right.
cool. Um, okay, so what do you love about teaching now? Like, what keeps you going for 27 years?
Well, I think let's be honest, is with any job. I mean, there are days where you have tough days where you're like, oh, this went terrible.
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
Yeah.
And other days where you feel so good about having helped someone see a different way of thinking about a topic or an idea. And those are very rewarding days for me. When there's that moment of illumination where the light bulb goes on. And so that's what keeps me going. And the kids are they're awesome. They're just great people to be around because they're not, at least not as of yet, they're not kind of sullen or sad about the world and depressed, by what's happening and things. They haven't lived quite long enough to get pessimistic. So there's a lot of optimism still in the classroom.
Yeah, and as a literary teacher, that is teaching these metaphors and like these life lessons, which I guess every subject has, but literature and English specifically is teaching them hacks that can help them like live a joyful, informed life, and wondering if they'll, in college and some of them might not end up majoring in the humanities. So it's like impactful because it's your chance, right, to really make that mark, right?
It's always funny when I have a student who is so brilliant, they're gonna be a great English person, and then they come back years later. Oh, I'm a doctor now. I went to medical school, and it's like, what, But that's great. I'm always grateful to hear that. I'm happy for them, but I'm always like, oh, I thought you were gonna go to the humanities,
And being able to become good writers is like such a skill.
Right.
That's like a really important skill.
Yeah.
What do you teach seniors? What's in there?
So we have a course called Border Crossings, and not the border wall crossing and all that stuff, but sort of crossing boundaries of thought, boundaries of culture, and things like that. So it's a world literature type of course where we let the students kind of experience a country or a culture outside of their box. So that's what we're doing. So we do a lot of essays. We use the Siegel Reader for that. We just read When the Emperor Was Divine, which is a story about the Japanese internment camps of World War II. We'll be doing The Power of One when we get back by Bryce Courtney, which is a fantastic book. So, and then also we cross borders in genre. We're doing Watchmen in the spring, a graphic novel, which is really cool.
Which Megaran and we have a song about that on our new album where we have all our Nerdcore friends do the different characters.
Oh, really?
So Megaran and I just did an album. It's called the Dewey Decibel System, and it's all books, and that's the one graphic novel we did. So I'll give you the download link.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. I've been threatening to go as Rorschach for Halloween. I keep missing the chance to order the costume. Yeah.
Did you see the movie?
Yeah, I did. It's pretty awesome.
I love the long version where they did the animated pirate cartoon in there. I don't know if you ever seen. There's like a 4-hour version, and like an hour of it is. Yeah, I forget what it's.
The Tales of the Black Freighter.
Yeah, the Tales of the Black Freighter, and how that is like a metaphor for the stories happening. It's pretty cool, man. If you get a chance to see the full version, I recommend it. It's long though, but it's great.
Yeah, isn't that just a mind-blowing, incredible book? It's such a feast for the eyes. I mean, the panels and how everything connects, and everything, nothing's left to chance in that. It's fantastic.
And isn't it symmetrical in a way? The layout, like I remember hearing that, like if you open in the middle and then flip back, the panel layout is a mirror.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's always in triptychs and threes, and it's an amazing piece of work.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's progressive that you're teaching that. Yeah. Where do you feel like you'll always want to teach till you retire, Or do you ever? Is there other career paths you think about?
I think I'll go out on on the horse of teaching. Yeah, I think I'll be doing that for the rest of the time. Um, but I'll still write and play music even after, you know. So that's always on the back burner as well.
Do the other teachers like? Do you find that they look up to you and ask you questions because they know you're one of the Jedi there?
One of the Jedi. Yeah, help you, I will. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the younger teachers, I get questions from them from time to time. The thing that's really wild, and this is a crazy, crazy thing, but the reason I got the job at Stevenson was because this woman went on maternity leave to give birth to her daughter, who is now teaching at the high school at Stevenson.
Wow.
Yeah. So when she first arrived, I said, you're the reason I'm here. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, it's a long story.
That's very full circle.
Yeah.
How many students, high school students are there? Is it still like 600?
It's 500.
500.
Yeah.
I remember that small high school being cool because you got to really know everyone and know all the teachers well, and the teacher-student ratio was special.
I think that's another big draw. I mean, our classroom sizes are, I have 11, 12 kids in my class, and that's priceless. I mean, it's so important. I think that's part of a great sell for a school is the student-teacher ratio.
Has there been more international students? Has those demographics changed?
Yeah. When 2008 came and the financial crisis happened, one of the strategies for Stevenson was to admit more international students because financially it was helpful for them to do that. But the new president, one of his aims is to sort of maybe limit that a little bit more and bring back more of the domestic students in that market.
And it's still like half and half kids who live on campus and day students?
It's more boarding now. I'd say it's about like, say 325 and then 175.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's changed, I think.
It has. Yeah. It used to be a lot more evenly placed.
Did they build more dorms then?
Yeah. There's a new building called the Barrows Building. That's probably that's probably 5 years old now at this point. So yeah, they did build a little bit more.
Going on campus, when I've gone back to visit, it really feels like a small liberal arts college. So, it's got more of a college vibe, and I guess because people live on campus, I don't know.
I agree with you. It definitely has that feeling, and I think part of that is Kevin Hicks's vision. He's the new president of the school, or this is his 4th year, and I think he really brings that feeling. I mean, he is a college professor himself, and you get that feeling.
One last story I want to tell. I remember when we were graduating middle school, we were lucky because we had you in middle school and then you started teaching the high school. So I got to see you a lot.
Right.
In the middle school graduation, I remember you said to us, no, do what you know you have to do. That's what you said to us during the line when we were leaving. And that's kind of makes me feel kind of emotional thinking about that because I went off and made rap music and did my creative stuff, which was so inspired by the time and love you showed me. And I wonder now, like, you probably at this point, so many people you've taught have become adults and you follow them. And, was there any advice that someone maybe gave you like that as a kid that stuck with you? Mr. Salerno's to you in your life?
It's probably my mom was like my biggest influence in terms of how I see the world. And she embraced whatever I wanted to do. And she encouraged me, to follow what I felt that I needed to do. And so I think, I think of her a lot, obviously, and think of her lessons to me, in that she embraced the idea of something that I felt strongly about and that I wanted to do. There was never any poo-pooing of, oh, no, you don't want to do that or you can't do that. And I think that's the important thing is, that what I've tried to convey to students that, do what it is you feel you need to do. And I think that's, um, I'm sure they hear that from other corners as well, but I think that's the number one goal, is to give them a sense of space, give them a sense that that they have room to do what it is that they want to do, and that they shouldn't be discouraged. So that's I think my mom was the one who brought that out in me, and I try and bring out in others.
That's pretty amazing, man.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was sorry to hear about that, about your loss. How are you doing now?
Oh, I'm doing better. I mean,
Yeah.
it's part of the life process, but it is transformative, because there is the life that you live with your parents and the life that you live after. And so I'm now navigating those waters. So it's just a strange time, but so many, there's so many blessings that I, you take the heartache of it with all the good that was there, and that the time that you had with her and with your parents. So it's just trying to figure out a new way of seeing the world, and a new way of moving through it that you haven't done before.
And the fact that you've passed that on, right? The love and the support she gave you, you've passed on to thousands of people now, which is really her living legacy, the inspiration she gave you and the people you've inspired. Do you think about that?
Um, I, I think I'll probably think about that when I'm done, maybe teaching. I'll consider it, but it's for example, when a carpenter builds something, there's that feeling of joy and love, and knowing that you can always come back and see it, and like, I did that there. With teaching, you don't really have that. You hope that you've done well, but you don't always see what the results are. And so, sitting here with you is like, oh my God, this is really cool. This is a chance to kind of revisit something that was done years ago, and things that you don't always remember, for like the anecdotes that you talked about today. I'm like, oh wow, I don't even remember that particular thing, but it's cool to know that it's flowered in good ways.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, your influence, inspiration, has always been very important to me, and it's really cool for me to talk about this and to have a friendship with you, and to kind of go down memory lane. You do poetry readings, you write books. I was wondering, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but would you mind like reading a poem?
All right, I'll read this poem called Childhood, and since it's kind of topical, okay, and this is Childhood. The center is the eye moving, as if it were a crab cartwheeling along the bearing seafloor of the mind, kaleidoscoping out of control. The way you saw the colors of the sun when you were young, the way you danced in slow motion, an astronaut on a spacewalk tethered by the strings of the blue Danube. You remember your bare feet buried in the tall summer grass of morning, where the blades caressed the dew between your toes. The eye was a spiraling slide downward into the exploding red sunshine of childhood, even as your limbs extended outward with open fingers, tracing the cotton candied clouds of discovery, those ships you boarded, gliding by toward the unbounded, unmeasured, and unrehearsed moments of the world.
That's a great poem.
Thank you.
Kerouac talks in one of his first books, Dr. Sachs. He has this story about this kid he ends talking about this kid who's reading in bed, and how the world is fresh like that. And talking about the dew between the toes reminds me of that.
Yeah.
That he says you'll never have a literary experience like this again, right? And sometimes maybe it's better when you're a kid, you don't realize how special it is, because then you're more in the moment,
Right. Oh yeah.
Childhood.
Right. It's just being, it's the eternal now. You're not focused on anything but the joy of that particular moment, whether it's dancing or singing or, running around on the beach. They're the purest moments that we have in our life.
We're going to see Rush with the English teacher when your dad.
Yeah, that was pretty cool too.
Well, you are. Well, I'll post this before your reading, but do you want to talk about your February reading?
Yeah, I'll be reading February 10th in Monterey at the Old Capitol Books. I haven't done a reading in a while, so I've got some new material. I'm working on a chapbook that hopefully it's going to be called Holding Spaces, and that will hopefully be out sometime in the new year. And I'll be hanging out with your dad. He's hosting, and that'll be fun.
It warms my heart to know that there are these poets who have a community here, and that that's special. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, there are a lot of wonderful writers around in the area and in Santa Cruz as well.
Where do you have a place you post your stuff? Like, do you have a website?
I do. It's www.samuelsalernopoetry.com. It's under maintenance right now, but it'll be back up in the next couple weeks. So.
And you're on Facebook. Are you on Twitter too, or no?
I'm not. I was when I was listening to you talk to your dad last week, and he has everything, and I was like, oh my God, I've got nothing here. No, I don't do Twitter, but I'm definitely on Facebook. So
that's cool.
Sam Salerno.
So it's nice to focus your energy. That's good. You're not too all over the place because it all changes so quickly, I guess.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it low key, I guess.
So with social media and stuff, I'm sure you get friend requests from current students. Like, I'm friends with you on Facebook, but like, how do you? Oh man, that must be crazy, right? Like,
oh no, I don't. We don't. Yeah, I don't accept current students. That's kind of a school policy anyway.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just the right thing. It's the right thing. It's fine if they're adults and but no, it'd be kind of weird to have a friend who's currently there,
because then they know your whole life through Facebook, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I mean, yeah, it'd just be awkward.
So I'm lucky to be a part of the alumni Sam Salerno friend list.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm lucky to have you as a friend. So,
well, thank you, buddy. I appreciate your time. This has been a really special episode.
Thank you, Andrew. This has been great.
And be sure to, if you're in the California Central Coast area, be sure to go see Sam's reading because he's great. All right, peace.
Bye.
I would like to tell you the story of a boy born into the world with love is his only toy. Then one day a light it shone from above, and God said, I need you for your love. Fast asleep in heaven, asleep in angels' arms. Jesus bless this child now. Nothing that cause them harm. And one day I will be there for you to hold you like I could never do. Though I cannot shed a tear, I will sing this lullaby. But don't you cry.
Heck yeah. Sam Salerno. Go check out his Poetry Reading Sunday at Old Capitol Books. He's killing it. Next week, we have my man, Worm Quartet, a.k.a. Timothy Christ, Shoebox. He's on my Robot Kills album. We did a cover of Adam and His Package's Metric song, and Shoebox did all the music, and I just kind of rapped over his track. But anyway, he's a hilarious artist who's put out a lot of great music, very prolific, very talented, awesome guy. He lives near Rochester, so when I play Rochester, I try to have him on the show and we perform together. And yeah, my one of my favorite people in the world. We're working on some educational songs. We'll get into that though next week. Thank you all for listening though. This has been great. And yeah, this is a special episode. And one other thing I want to talk about, I'm launching on YouTube is these throwback videos where I'm doing like MC Lars remembers ... and the year, because my mom archived all these old family videos. So that's going to be on the YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed, mclars.tv will take you right to the YouTube channel where you can peep that flavor. Dewey Decibel coming May. UK tour dates are up. Starts the end of March. Nerdcoretour.com doing a May US tour. Stay tuned for that. Big announcements, joyful smiles. I love you guys. This is the MC Lars podcast. Have a great week, everyone. See you soon. And go check out Sam's reading if you're in California. Bye.